In the summer of 1978, a young female traffic cop disappeared during what should have been an ordinary night on duty. She radioed in as usual. Her patrol car was last seen heading down a quiet stretch of highway, and then nothing. No further reports, no sightings, and no trace of her vehicle. For her family and her fellow officers, the disappearance was both shocking and devastating. The case quickly became one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in the department. For years, investigators searched every back road, every wooded area, and every abandoned building in the region. Rumors began to swirl. Some believed she had been attacked. Others suspected she might have stumbled onto something dangerous, while a few even whispered that she might have chosen to vanish. Yet without. Then, in 1993, 15 long years later, the truth, or at least a fragment of it, finally surfaced. A fisherman on a wide, slow-moving river spotted something metallic glinting beneath the water. When divers were called in, they uncovered a chilling sight. The missing patrol car, submerged and rusting away in the riverbed. Inside were two skeletons. One was soon confirmed to be. The shocking discovery reopened a case long thought buried, and with it came a host of new questions. Who was the second body? How had the car ended up in the river unnoticed for so many years? And perhaps most haunting of all, was her death an accident, or had she been silenced? Before her disappearance became the subject of whispers and newspaper headlines, she was simply known as Officer Margaret Ellis, a determined young woman who had chosen a difficult path at a time when few women wore the badge. Born in the early 1952, Margaret grew up in a modest household where discipline and responsibility were instilled from a young age. Her father had worked long hours at a steel plant, while her mother kept the family together through the daily struggles of small-town life. From her teenage years, Margaret stood out for her sense of justice. Neighbors remembered her as the girl who would step in to break up playground fights or walk younger children home when it was getting dark. Her decision to enter law enforcement came as no surprise to those who knew her well, though it raised eyebrows in a profession still dominated by men. After graduating from the police academy, she was assigned to traffic patrol, a demanding and often thankless role, yet one she carried with a quiet pride. She spent long shifts monitoring intersections, assisting stranded drivers, and writing reports late into the night. Colleagues described her as diligent, soft-spoken, and unshakably calm under pressure. She wasn't one to boast, but when her name came across the radio, people trusted the job would get done. Outside the uniform, Margaret lived a simple and steady life. She rented a small apartment near downtown, attended church on Sundays, and occasionally joined her coworkers for coffee after late shifts. She wrote letters often to her younger sister, who lived in another state, and she still carried hopes of one day starting a family of her own. But for the moment, her work was her calling. That calling, however, also placed her in harm's way. The late 1972 were not an easy time for officers. Drug activity was on the rise, small towns were changing, and danger often lurked in the most ordinary of traffic stops. Yet, by all accounts, Margaret embraced the risks, believing that her duty to protect others outweighed the dangers she faced. No one could have imagined that this dedication, the very thing that defined her, would also lead her into the shadows of one of the most haunting mysteries her town would ever know. The 17th of July, 1978, began like any other summer day for Officer Margaret Ellis. She reported for her evening shift just before sunset, her crisp uniform neatly pressed, her patrol car checked and fueled. According to the duty log, she was assigned to monitor a stretch of highway on the edge of town, a quiet route that occasionally saw speeding drivers or late-night truck traffic. For Margaret, it was routine, another long night behind the wheel, another set of reports to file by dawn. She was last heard from over the radio at 9:47 p.m. Her voice was steady, professional, nothing unusual in her tone. Dispatch logged her as conducting a standard patrol near a rural intersection by the river bend. That was the final transmission anyone ever received from her. When she failed to check in for her scheduled status update an hour later, dispatch grew concerned. At first, Officers thought she might be tied up with a traffic stop or assisting a motorist. But as the minutes stretched into hours, unease spread through the department. Calls to her radio went unanswered. Fellow patrol cars swept the area where she had last reported. The road was empty. The night air was heavy and still, as though the landscape itself had swallowed her whole. By midnight, search teams were organized. Officers drove through side roads, past farm fields, and down gravel tracks that rarely saw traffic. Flashlights cut across the darkness, combing ditches and fence lines. Deputies knocked on farmhouse doors, asking if anyone had seen a patrol car pass through. No one had. It was as if both Margaret and her vehicle had vanished into thin air. Back at headquarters, her absence sparked chaos. Supervisors pored over maps, tracing her last known location. Helicopters were called in the following morning to scour the riverbanks and woodlands. The community, shocked by the sudden disappearance of the officer they trusted, volunteered to help with the search. For days, hundreds of people combed fields and trails. Yet not a single piece of evidence was found. No skid marks, no broken glass, no sign of a struggle. Even the river that wound its way through the countryside seemed calm and empty. Rumors began almost immediately. Some whispered that she must have been ambushed by someone she pulled over. Others suggested she had stumbled upon criminal activity and paid the price for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. A few clung to the unlikely belief that she had chosen to vanish, perhaps overwhelmed by the pressures of her life. But those who knew her best rejected that idea outright. Margaret loved her work, and she would never have left her family behind without a word. As the weeks stretched into months, the case became one of the most baffling mysteries the department had ever faced. Her patrol car had not been spotted crossing into another jurisdiction. No credit cards were used. No personal belongings surfaced. It was as if both the officer and her vehicle had been erased from existence in a single night. By the end of that summer, hope had begun to fade. The department scaled back its search efforts, though her fellow officers continued to keep watch for any sign of her during their nightly patrols. Every traffic stop, every abandoned car, every tip from the public brought a flicker of anticipation, only to end in disappointment. Margaret Ellis had vanished on duty under the clear sky of a summer night, and no one could explain how or why. Her family clung to the desperate hope that one day she would be found alive. But for the town she left behind, the silence of that night became an open wound, a question with no answer, a story that seemed destined never to end. In the days that followed Margaret Ellis's disappearance, the small-town police department found itself under a pressure it had never experienced before. A missing officer was not just a tragedy, it was an emergency that shook the very trust of the community. The chief of police immediately escalated the case, bringing in county deputies and state investigators. They set up a command post at the station, maps pinned with colored tacks marking every place Margaret could have gone, every possible turn she might have taken in her patrol car. The first and most obvious step was to retrace her last known route. Officers drove the same stretch of highway, stopping at the rural intersection where she had last reported in. They checked roadside ditches, culverts, and tree lines, hoping for skid marks or debris. Nothing. From there, searchers expanded outward, combing through nearby fields and wooded patches. Even the shallow areas of the river were inspected, though at the time, nothing unusual was noted. Witnesses were interviewed across town. Some residents recalled seeing a patrol car earlier that night, but none could say for certain whether it was Margaret's. A trucker passing through claimed he spotted flashing lights in the distance near the river bend, though his description was too vague to build on. Another local said he remembered hearing what sounded like an argument carried on the wind, but no one else corroborated the story. Detectives also began to dig into Margaret's personal life, a step that often brings painful scrutiny in cases like these. They spoke with her co-workers, who unanimously described her as professional and dedicated. Friends and family were questioned repeatedly, but no evidence emerged of personal struggles that might have driven her to disappear voluntarily. Her apartment was tidy, nothing missing. Her bank account untouched. Her car, the very tool of her job, was gone with her. and that fact alone made the idea of her running away seem impossible. As the investigation dragged into weeks, the search widened. Helicopters flew grid patterns over miles of farmland and forest. Divers were sent into deeper parts of the river, though murky waters and strong currents made the search difficult. Still, no patrol car, no weapon, no uniform, no trace. Frustration grew within the department. The case began to draw attention from larger media outlets. Reporters descended on the town, their headlines hinting at scandal, corruption, or foul play. Rumors swirled wildly. Some residents whispered that Margaret had been silenced because she had uncovered something dangerous, perhaps involving drugs, organized crime, or even corruption inside the department itself. Others believed she had been targeted by someone she had previously stopped or arrested. Despite endless speculation, hard evidence was nowhere to be found. Leads dried up. Tips came in by the dozens, but every one led investigators to dead ends, abandoned barns, empty shacks, and isolated trails, with nothing but silence waiting at the end. The case file grew thicker with each passing month, but the answers remained elusive. By late autumn of 1978, the official search efforts began to slow. The community had exhausted itself. Hundreds of volunteers had combed through fields and riverbanks. Families had baked meals for search crews. Prayers had been held at church services. Yet the patrol car and its missing officer were still absent, like ghosts. Still, the case was never truly closed. Margaret's photograph remained pinned to the bulletin board inside the station, her badge number read aloud at memorial services for fallen officers. Every few months, detectives revisited the file, chasing down new rumors or revisiting old ones. For Margaret's family, each passing year without answers was a cruel reminder of what they had lost. The mystery lingered like a shadow over the town. How could an officer on duty in a marked car simply vanish without a trace? That question would haunt investigators for 15 long years, until one unexpected discovery would finally change everything. For 15 long years, the disappearance of Officer Margaret Ellis remained one of the most perplexing cold cases in the state. Her family carried the weight of silence. Her fellow officers grew older while still glancing down lonely highways at night, half expecting to see her headlights appear. Over time, the case became less of an active investigation and more of a painful legend, a mystery that seemed destined never to be solved. Then, in the spring of 1993, everything changed. On an unusually warm morning in April, a local fisherman made his way to the wide, slow-moving river a few miles downstream from where Margaret was last heard. As he steered his small boat near the bank, the water level lower than usual after a dry season revealed something strange. Beneath the shimmering surface, caught between the rocks and tangled roots, he spotted the faint outline of metal. At first, he assumed it was an old farm vehicle, one of many that had been dumped in rivers over the years. But as sunlight glinted off a corroded siren dome, his heart froze. It was a patrol car. Authorities were called immediately. Within hours, divers and recovery crews arrived on the scene. Curious onlookers gathered on the riverbank, whispers rippling through the crowd as the vehicle was slowly pulled from the water. Mud poured from its windows, moss clung to the fenders, and years of rust testified to its long imprisonment beneath the current. And then came the discovery that stunned everyone. Inside the car were two skeletons. The first was found slumped over in the driver's seat. A badge, still faintly visible on the uniform remains. Dental records confirmed what many had long suspected: the body was that of Officer Margaret Ellis. The second skeleton lay awkwardly across the passenger side, its identity at first a complete mystery. Unlike Margaret, this individual carried no badge, no wallet, no clear signs of who they had once been. The scene raised more questions than it answered. How had the car ended up in the river without being noticed all those years? How had divers missed it during the original search? Why was there a second body? And who was it? News of the discovery spread like wildfire. Newspapers splashed the headline across their front pages. Missing officer's car found in river, 2 bodies inside. Television crews rushed to the small town, and suddenly the quiet community was thrust back into a storm it thought had passed. For Margaret's family, the recovery of her body brought a painful kind of closure, but the presence of the second body transformed the case into something even darker. Investigators reopened the file with renewed urgency. The car itself was treated as a crime scene, every inch examined for clues. Evidence teams scraped away layers of rust, sifted through mud, and cataloged what remained of the two skeletons. Forensic experts worked to reconstruct the final moments inside that vehicle. Was it an accident? A struggle? A deliberate act meant to bury both driver and passenger beneath the river's silence? The community, once again, was divided by theories. Some insisted Margaret must have been ambushed and forced to drive into the river. Others believed she had been transporting a suspect when something went terribly wrong, and a darker whisper began to circulate that the unknown passenger may have been the reason she disappeared in the first place. After 15 years of questions, the river had finally given up its secret. But instead of solving the mystery, it had opened a deeper and more haunting Chapter 1 that would leave investigators and the public alike searching for answers in the shadows of the past. With the discovery of Margaret Ellis's patrol car in the river, the case moved from the realm of disappearance into the far more complex territory of unexplained death. The evidence was there: 2 skeletons, 1 officer known to be missing, and a still unidentified passenger. But what exactly had happened that night in 1978 remained as murky as the riverbed where the car had been hidden for so long. Investigators, journalists, and townspeople all wrestled with the same haunting question: accident or foul play? The most straightforward theory was that of a tragic accident. Some experts suggested Margaret may have been pursuing a suspect or transporting a civilian when she lost control near the river bend. With poor visibility at night and narrow roads, it was possible the patrol car veered off the embankment, plunging into the water. The river, swollen in summer currents, could have swallowed the vehicle quickly, making it nearly impossible to spot during the frantic search that followed. Supporters of this theory pointed out that accidents involving patrol cars were not unheard of, and Margaret was known for being thorough. If she had picked someone up, she would have been transporting them by procedure. But this explanation left troubling gaps. Why had no skid marks or broken barriers been found, and who was the unidentified passenger? A second theory leaned heavily toward foul play. Margaret's last radio call placed her near a lonely stretch of road, the kind of place where an ambush could easily occur. Some believe she had stopped to check on a suspicious vehicle or had pulled someone over. In this version, the passenger was her attacker. Perhaps a struggle ensued inside the patrol car, leading to the vehicle being driven or forced into the river. If true, then the second skeleton could belong to the assailant, trapped in the same watery grave as the officer. It was a chilling possibility that Margaret, even in her final moments, may have brought down the very person who ended her life. A third hypothesis came from whispers that had circulated since the original disappearance that Margaret had stumbled upon something much larger than a routine traffic stop. The late 1972 saw a rise in organized crime, drug trafficking, and corruption in unexpected corners of small-town America. Some investigators speculated that the unidentified body might have belonged to a figure connected to such activities, and that Margaret's death was not random at all, but a silencing. If true, her fate was entwined with something far bigger than anyone in her department could have imagined. But with evidence lost to time, this theory remained frustratingly speculative. Then there was the possibility, raised quietly but persistently, that the unknown passenger was not an enemy at all. Could it have been an acquaintance, a friend, or even someone Margaret had agreed to give a ride to that night? If so, the tragedy might have been nothing more than bad luck. 2 people in the wrong place at the wrong time, swallowed by the river. Yet even this softer theory failed to explain the secrecy surrounding the case for so long. Forensic teams worked tirelessly to extract answers from the remains, but 15 years underwater had erased much of what they hoped to find. Clothing was decayed, personal effects nearly destroyed. Dental records eventually ruled out a handful of missing persons, but no definitive identity for the second body was confirmed in those first months. The lack of certainty only deepened the town's obsession with speculation. Each theory carried weight, Yet none could fully explain the silence of that night. Was Margaret Ellis the victim of a tragic accident, an ambush gone wrong, or a secret far darker than anyone was ready to admit? The patrol car's emergence from the river brought some closure, but it also cast a long shadow, one filled with questions that still hang over her story like unfinished chapters in a book that refuses to end. The discovery of Officer Margaret Ellis's patrol car should have brought an ending. After all, her remains had been found, her long disappearance explained in part by the river that concealed her for 15 years. But in truth, the answers were incomplete, and the shadows around her death only grew darker. For her family, the recovery of her body allowed them to finally lay her to rest. A funeral was held with full honors, her badge placed gently on the flag-draped coffin. Fellow officers stood in silent formation, their faces lined with grief and unresolved questions. They spoke of Margaret's courage, her dedication, and her kindness, but no words could bridge the aching gap left by the unknown. The second body, never conclusively identified, became a symbol of the mystery itself, a silent passenger whose presence raised more questions than it answered. Was this person an ally, an enemy, or simply a stranger caught in tragic circumstances? Without clarity, the story of Margaret's last moments remained fractured, like pieces of a puzzle forever missing. In the years that followed, the case continued to haunt investigators and residents alike. Some believed the truth had been buried with the bodies, while others held fast to the hope that new evidence might one day surface. But time is a ruthless keeper of secrets, and with every year that passed, the chances of uncovering the full story grew smaller. Today, Margaret Ellis's name still lingers in the town she once served. Her disappearance is told in hushed tones, a reminder of how fragile safety can be, even for those sworn to protect it. And while the river finally surrendered her body, it never revealed the whole truth. That silence, perhaps, is the most haunting part of all. If stories like this leave you thinking and wanting to know more, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more real-life mysteries and untold stories to light. And if you believe this case still holds secrets waiting to be uncovered, share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective.